we have some of the intention of commemorating Lewis and Clarke and their travels up this river, but this man was about 30 years later, after about 25 years later, and this man was the first man to allow a white person to set up anywhere around here, and the intention's good with the flag, but here we preserve our warrior spirit. We have different feelings about that flag, all right, and what it represents, because we still suffer today from that colonization. And men like War Eagle, he had another name, was Little Eagle, Huyana. Huyana was a Dakota word for eagle. Huya, na is something that is dear to you. So Little Eagle, or a cherished eagle, would have been another translation for his name. But in 1832, he left his people up by Minneapolis. And for the Dakota, for the Sioux Nation, we have origin stories of where our people first opened our eyes to this creation there near Minneapolis. And the U.S. government later took Fort Snelling and decided to put a military fort right on top of our creation story. And that creation story would look just like this. Two rivers that meet, the Minnesota River and the Mississippi River. Where those two meet is where the first Dakota opened their eyes to this creation. And what that means is there's an understanding. There's an understanding about the universe. There's a perspective. And at some point, someone received that understanding and looked at the universe in a different way. And that location is where that happened. And for hundreds of years, women would come and give birth to their children. They would come from all over. They'd walk all the way to that place and give birth. So that way their child, too, could open their eyes to this creation, just like that first Dakota man did. And so, in 1832, the trade influences, all the stuff that was being brought to our people, got our people bickering. And he left. He foreseen chiefs fighting amongst themselves, so he left and he come down this way. And he established himself along the Missouri. The Missouri is that river over on that side, and this is the Big Sioux. And the translation in Dakota for the Big Sioux is the river that's easy to paddle. So it's a long name. It's a long name. But I figured that would have, earlier when I met you, I was thinking about those things, yeah. Right? And so he established himself here, and very quickly he opened up trade negotiations with the American Fur Company. The American Fur Company decimated pretty much all living things within this valley all the way to St. Louis for money. Yep. And those things were then traded to fur companies out east, and then those furs weren't even sold to regular people. They were sold to aristocrats that could afford beaver hats, because that was the fashion of the times, right? So regular Joes didn't even get to enjoy those hides and those skins and things like that. And so quite often what it was the women specialized in scraping those hides. So the man made the deal, but the woman put in all the work.
Sounds about right.
Okay.
That's right. Didn't we say
That's right.
the women's work was
And I'm saying this because we have to try to understand the economics. Now, do you think that those women got paid fair wage for what they did? That's right. And then you have aristocrats with really nice stuff, right? At the end of the day. So imagine before all that, what an Indian was adorned, how they adorned themselves. We're humble people, but at the same time, we wore all of our honors. So you knew exactly who you were messing with when you encountered an Indian man or an Indian woman. And you could look and see. There were elders that would have a knife, and on that knife they'd have a red circle. And for a red circle, it meant that with her knife, she had scraped and processed over 100 teepees. And it takes about 16 buffalo hides to make an 18-foot teepee, which was the size of the teepees at the time. So for one house, a man had to hunt 16 buffalo, and the women would process that whole thing and turn it into something livable. So an elder would have multiple dots, multiple red circles, so hundreds. They made hundreds of homes for people. So in the colonizer culture, it's the men that build the houses, right? For us, it was the opposite. It was the women that made those things. And the lodge always belonged to the woman. A divorce was simply putting the man's things outside. Because he could go make a way in the world. Yeah, he could go make a way in the world. He had things to protect himself with. And the woman would take her teepee, the teepee and her things, and be protected by her village, right? So he worked for the American fur trade, and that exit over there, is just to the north of that exit is Riverside Park. And Riverside Park, as you come up this way, you could see that plaque of Theophile Bruyere, or Bruyere. His lodge, the first lodge of this area where they let him put his log cabin, is over there in Riverside Park. They put it over there. He had a dream about where to put that, and he shared that dream with War Eagle, and War Eagle showed him where he thought that was. And so from then on, any negotiations, you had a lot of Indians that heard there's a white man here. Well, what does that mean? I don't know. We're going to have meetings. Well, let's go see him. Let's go see. I want to go see one. They've never seen him before. Never even seen one before. So that park, Riverside Park, is the council location where the Indians would meet and negotiate the future of both sides of the situation. All right? And a lot of this stuff revolved around economics. And how can our families be, how can we benefit one another, right? Complement each other's lives. That's why he's called that, friend of white man, right? And Theophile was the first white man. He gave his 2 daughters to him. Dawn Woman and Blazing Star Woman were their names. His 2 daughters, he gave them as wives to him to solidify those relationships, those trade relationships. And Dawn and Blazing Star Woman are buried along this bluff as well. War Eagle's buried here. This just isn't a monument. This is a burial site. This is a sacred site. His 2 daughters are buried here. His 4 grandchildren are buried here as well. And then Theophile Bruyere was buried in Salix, and they exhumed him and buried him up here with his wives and children. So there's a whole family here, and that family is about that merger of different cultures, right? And so that's why he's friend of white man. So our challenge to the city is who's going to be friend of the Indian, because it doesn't work out that well economically. The economics have changed, you know, and so where you're standing right now is where my father started. My father and some other women leadership had started getting tired of certain dynamics in this town revolving our Indian children, and how the state still takes our Indian children and puts them with non-native foster families. Colonization still happens. It happens in a different way. Okay. So, for the last this year we're going to celebrate our 20th year of of our march to honor children that are lost in the system. And they either get ripped away from their families and sent off somewhere they've never seen or been before. Some of our Indian youth have never even interacted with too many white folks, and then they're ripped away from their families and thrown into a whole new life. And they don't do very well. A lot of them run away. A lot of them end up in prison because they're constantly running, constantly looking for something familiar to them. So they have that spirit, but the state is slow to figure out a solution. So my father started these marches to honor children that are ripped away from families, and we've developed new policies around where foster families have to include cultural activities for their. It doesn't matter if they're Indian, Black, Asian, whatever. You have to provide some culture, and then we're going to take that even further, because now, all a family has to do is Google how to make fry bread, and that's their culture. Fry bread is a food, a survivor food for us. It's one of the main contributors of diabetes to our people and heart disease, but that's what we had to eat to survive because the economics had shifted so much. Okay? But so where we start our prayer here, it's 4 stops. We stop 4 times and make a prayer. We start it here. We stop at Rose Grants Jackson, a recovery place for women and men, and a lot of our family members end up in treatment because of the trauma. Because of the economics, and because we're constantly in survivor mode, we don't get to enjoy our spiritual activities. So some of our adults get lost, And so we stop down there and make a prayer down there, and then we go down to the courthouse and we bless the courthouses where the judges make decisions about Indian children and their families. And then we all meet up at the convention center downtown, and we have a big feast. And so my father wanted to, we used to start it over in South Sioux and walk across the bridge, but we shifted to War Eagle to pay homage to the relationship that was originally built, almost 200 years ago now. 190 years ago. So that's just a little segue into, today, what we're dealing with today, and how it was a long time ago when we first invited somebody to go ahead. Yeah, you could post up over there. Matter of fact, I'm going to let you marry 2 of my daughters. He must have thought pretty highly of him. Recently, we had a ceremony. War Eagle Park is 25 acres, and it overlooks this site. And I researched and I discovered that he hunted the tip of South Dakota. What you're looking at over there is Nebraska. And then in the center is South Dakota, and then you're standing in Iowa. So his hunting camp was here. There's a creek that empties out, and he would walk through that opening and he'd go and hunt on that South Dakota side. I think that 94, there's a bluff over there, right where you're parking, there's a mound, a big mound. That's where he's actually buried at. And that whole hillside caved and blocked the railroads down below. And so they shifted the monument over here. They kept his burial over there, but they put his monument over here. And the 25 acres that we're on, Val, myself, and others, me and my companion moved back here last year, and about 1.5 years ago, I've been on what we call Ozuya for about 5 years. Ozuya is like a journey. It's like a warpath, but it's a journey. And I was foreseeing moving back here to my hometown, and I was really interested in all this here. What are we doing? Why do we have such a small Indian center? We have over 2,000 Indians that live in this city, and the Indians that are here is the largest population of Indians in all of Iowa. There is no Indian center in all of Iowa. in the whole state, and the state is named after a tribe of Indians, right? We used to have one here, and that fell through back in like the early 90s. And so it's been 30 years, and the Indian Center we have, if you have people in the community that are going to say, okay, we're going to teach the youth Dakota language, or we're going to teach them Omaha language, or whatever. If somebody passes away, well, we got to cancel that, because then we got to do a funeral. So we don't have the space to fully serve our Indian people, and so the challenge was to Val was like, let's do a walkthrough, and we walked through this whole park, and I told her what I envisioned, and she got it, picked it up right away. And then not far from here along the ridgeline, we had a confirmation of that there's a very important food group to our people, that it was a small flower. It's only this big, and we call it the prairie turnip, but our word for it is timsina. And you dig it up, and it's a bulb, and you peel the skin off, and then we would braid it. There's stories about why we braided it and stuff, but very important food group for us. And to find that up here, it's hard to find out on the prairie. That was a confirmation to me that we should be turning our attention to this area. And then so we made a prayer about it while we were up here. And then within about a month, somebody in the city had reached out and said, hey, I got all this stuff. We'll share it with you, Val, and come and take a look. So about an hour later, she called me and said, hey, you got to get down here. So we went down there, and we seen that in the 60s, the city had, throughout time, they wanted to preserve this burial site for him. And then they built this because it was pitiful. And whoever designed this said, well, let's do a good honoring for him. Let's honor him. And so they built this. And then we seen in the 60s that the city was actually organizing to prepare to give this to tribes, for the tribes to have all this. But the tribes didn't want to funnel resources off reservation. And your constituents can kind of be like, hey, what are we sending money up there for? We got problems here, right? So nothing really come of it.